All right. Hello, everybody. This is Zack, Parnell, CEO of ITI. I have Ken Laird here and Amanda Henry. I'll introduce them on a slide coming up, but thanks for joining us. And most notably today, we have Chris Smith, Corporate Services Manager at Morrow Equipment out of Salem. Thank you, Chris, for joining us.
No worries. Thank you.
Okay. If you haven't attended before, this is a new group we've started. We call these technical advisory groups. So when we put together new training programs or new products, we typically organize a few dozen folks, or a small group or a larger group from industry. This is an example of the first technical advisory group we held for the VR simulation line. And this was actually at Mammoot's headquarters in Rocheron, Texas, outside of Houston. You'll notice about 20 folks there, and we actually brought the aerial work platform simulator to give people an idea of what VR could do for cranes. And then we took folks through the ideas we had for building the next generation of simulators. It was really fantastic to hear their feedback because most people had experienced simulators, whether it's cranes or heavy equipment or aircraft, over the years. Simulators have been around for a long time, but with the commercialization of virtual reality in 2016, that really has just opened up the possibilities for simulation today. So that's what we're going to chat about. Our technical advisory group is helping us build out various crane models and what scenarios do we want to build. And the environment structure, the loads. We work heavily with our internal technical group and trainers. Then we also rope in very gracious organizations like Morrow Equipment and Chris Smith when we're talking about a subject like tower cranes, which is our agenda today. So as I mentioned, Amanda Henry is here. She's in charge of communities and marketing at ITI. And then Ken Laird will be really guiding most of this conversation as our product coordinator of VR and online. To give you a quick idea, in the future, we'll be holding these every month. Future agenda items for the next 2 months at least will be, we're developing a heavy lift crawler in partnership with Laird. It's the LR 1300. So we'll be going over the environment design and then different scenarios, as well as we're nearly complete with the VR overhead crane simulator. So we're asking subscribers to join. I think that's going to be in July, I believe, to do quality assurance discussions. So you'll in your simulator stations, you'll have the latest update for overhead cranes if you're open to downloading the beta version and giving us feedback. So we'd love you to do that, and appreciate you getting on in July to talk about QA for overhead crane. Additional conversations these are some neat projects we're working on with United Rentals, a mobile learning center project, as well as wallet card and universal record system. So just check your emails. You'll be seeing updates on this in the future, in the coming weeks. To give you a quick overview of ITI, if you don't know much about us, VR simulation is one way we service the technical requirements for our customers regarding workforce development. We also have an online learning library that can be deployed through mobile and desktop applications, obviously. And we do a ton of training still at customer locations around the world. And then we have 9 training centers currently in North America that we host open enrollment courses at. The VR library currently, and Chris, I don't know if you've seen this yet, but we got to get Chris more. Chris hasn't had a lot of time yet in the sim, but I'm excited to show him the crane types that are already in existence. We have a Tadano rough terrain crane, link belt lattice boom crawler, a Terex boom truck, and a Broderson carry deck, as well as a boom lift, mobile elevator work platform, and scissor lift. As we mentioned earlier, heavy lift crawler, tower crane, and overhead crane are currently in development, and then forklift, telehandler, loader, and skid steer will be starting development in the coming month. So that's kind of the idea for the library. We call this the crane and heavy equipment library. And what's neat about it is subscribers are able to access all of these simulations from their subscription. So just need the required hardware to do so. We're not going to get too deep into that today, as we want to get into our technical topics. But the last thing I want to mention is another way to participate outside of the technical advisory group is just we host different events and community events, what we call them, but we under the brand LIGHTS, which is Leadership in Industrial Technology, Education, Safety. A part of that, we also have a podcast. So this is an example of a podcast we did. I think we launched it in March with Bechtel's Chief Innovation Officer, David Wilson. So Amanda launches 1 or 2 podcasts a month, and we're really chatting with thought leaders, taking a deep dive on some topic related to industrial technology, education, or safety. So as I mentioned, the events we host, we're actually hosting an event in Pittsburgh in June at the Energy Innovation Center, and you can find out more information on lights.org about that. So without further ado, I want to turn it over to Ken and Chris, and this will really be a conversation mainly between Ken and Chris. But if you have any questions, if you're not a panelist and you're just listening in, if you have any questions, feel free to type them in the question box in the GoToWebinar tool, and Amanda will filter those and get them to Ken to bring up in the conversation. But Chris, again, we're really happy you're here and excited to, actually, we'd love it, but if you could take 3 minutes to kind of give an overview of your experience and why we've asked you to join this meeting as we dive into tower crane.
Thanks, Zach. I appreciate it. My name's Chris Smith. Obviously, he's mentioned I'm the corporate service manager and the direct Morrow equipment. If you're not super familiar with more of tower cranes in North America, we have 23 different locations and a fleet of 650 plus tower cranes that we have in our rental fleet. I personally have been in the crane industry for 35 years. I spent 20 plus years as a trainer, 10 years as an operator. I've been the last 10 years of my career here with Morrow Equipment, working primarily at first in our training center and then moving up into managing service operations over the last couple of years. I've served on a lot of committees throughout the years. I'm currently an alternate on the B30 main committee. I've been on the B30.3 tower crane subcommittee. I am currently on the NCCO's tower crane management committee and was actually part of that committee from its inception when they developed the tower crane certification program and the practical exam that went with that. So I've worked with cranes all my life. It's pretty much all I know. And, you know, when it comes to tower cranes, that's my main thing.
Thank you, Chris. And to point out a couple of things, when Chris said B30, that's the American Society of Mechanical Engineers, ASME B30 main committee. So there's a very, very small group of people that are able to get on that B30 committee, and it really is a thought leadership forum that writes all the standards that are used widely throughout North America, obviously in the US, but also Canada references ASME quite a bit in other countries in the Western Hemisphere. And Chris, the other thing you might talk on is we haven't, and I don't think this is in Ken's agenda, which is okay, but the partnership with Laird with Morrow is important to speak to. So the tower crane that we're modeling is actually a Laird 550 hammerhead tower crane. And then we're also modeling or simulating a Laird LR 1300. But could you touched on that Morrow is the exclusive distributor of Laird. Could you unpack that a little bit more and maybe mention where Morrow services customers worldwide, as well as the relationship with Biberock?
Yeah, we got the distributorship just for that. We support other Laird product, but we support the tower crane product and have been the distributor for that particular product since the mid 80s. And at our service locations, We have service locations throughout the United States. We have 3 service locations in Canada. We have a service location in Mexico City, Mexico, 3 in Australia, and 2 in New Zealand. And what we do out of those support facilities is we provide overhaul and inspection of the equipment to prepare it for dispatch to a job site. We have technical staff that trains here at our training location in Salem, Oregon. They also go back and do training at the factory, usually after they've been with the company for a year. And then if new product lines and stuff come out, they'll go back to the factory and get specialized training on that. And what that does is it gives us the availability to be able to support the customer fully, whether he's renting a tower crane from us or whether he's purchasing a Liebherr tower crane from us. So we have the technical staff, we have the parts that go along with that to maintain the cranes. Logistically, we maintain several $1 million in parts, so we don't get caught in the lag times of having to ship spare parts from Europe. If you're not super familiar with the tower crane industry, you'll find there are no domestic manufacturers of tower cranes that really exist in the United States. All of the product comes from either Europe, China nowadays, Italy, Germany, France. That's where the primary markets are for manufacture of those pieces of equipment. So being logistically prepared to support those is a big challenge. Considering from a business aspect, you're dealing in 2 different business days from North America to Germany when it comes to technical issues or parts support or things like that. So that's where we work really hard to make sure that we've got the properly people and all the equipment.
That was the overview I was looking for, buddy. That really helps us understand just Morrow's level of expertise related to Liebherr tower cranes. It's very profound that Liebherr, a world leader in crane manufacturing, relies on Morrow for so much in such a big market like North America. So and it speaks volumes of the organization and your expertise. So I don't have nothing else. I'm gonna step for a few minutes, guys, but Chris and Ken look forward to the discussion.
All right, I'm for tower crane. One of the challenges that we faced here is a lot of our current cranes, they sit on the ground. The cab is very close to the ground. This is the first environment that we've had that works at a very tall scale, that it's high off the ground. So we had to create an environment that works with that facilitates the use of a crane at a very high level. And so the Liebherr 550 ECH has about 100-foot mast height, 235-foot jib length is the configuration we chose. And we talked about this, and we decided that we'd make sort of a construction environment with buildings still, under construction, skeleton structures. And we have Mike's existing sketch right here. And this was the very first sketch that we had for a tower crane environment. We talked about, making buildings with different stories, having staging areas around here, like in here and over here, and roads running along, possibly with power lines on the side, First Avenue and Main Street, just, very simple names, but it gives you an idea of what the environment was supposed to look like. And we got a perspective sketch here, and you can kind of see, there's side alleys and staging areas and trucks that you can lift onto and off of. And from that, we went to a little bit more detailed sketch here, and you can see this is the This is the more detailed sketch, and we've got, trucks labeled T1 through T5 that loads can be lifted onto and off of, piles of materials, steel beams and cribbing, lumber stacks and cribbings, staging areas, covers, ground vaults that we can play around with. These buildings are labeled out B1 through B6, and they all have hatches H11, H12, H21, and so on and so forth.
If I can jump in, Ken and Chris, maybe it might be helpful to the audience and you, Chris, that our methodology for training and assessing crane operators is in simulation is really to make sport out of it, if for lack of a better term. So we build an environment, and it's sort of like a game where in this environment, the operator will take on upwards of 40 to 60 tasks, which we call scenarios, but might be for the Halo players out there. I don't know what the kids play anymore, but growing up, we played some Halo, and those are levels, in a game. Chris, what was your game of choice? Were you a gamer?
Oh, back in the day, I played Frogger.
There you go. Yeah, so
a long time ago, far, far away.
Yeah, exactly. I'm with you though. I played a game or two of Frogger. So the idea here is to build a world, if you will, and several scenarios can be built out of this that Ken will go over. But Ken, please keep describing. I know you'll get Chris involved with understanding if anything's missing. So I don't know if Chris, this is the first time you're seeing this.
I saw the initial drawings, the hand sketch drawings, quite a while back. We talked about that.
Yep.
And this was sort of our more detailed sketch, and this is actually what we map out our scenarios on. And you can see that you'll see that a little bit later in the scenario templates that we designed and wrote out. And so you go from that 2D sketch to a 3D environment here that I just kind of quickly mocked up, and you can see just the scale and the scope of what we're trying to do here. You can see that mast is dimensioned out 234 feet, 235, somewhere in there. You can see the overall radius of the crane still, and it contains all these buildings, a little bit of these roads. So if we wanted to lift off of a truck that was staged on the road there, we could. Not a lot of detail here, but you can see, and if you needed to, you could go back and dimension out this building, is 112 feet wide. This thing here is, 93 plus 114, so you can see that's about 200 feet across there. So it gives you a good idea of the scope there. And so that's more or less our environment. We're working on that as we speak. They're building that out, and I think tomorrow we've decided on a deadline for the scenarios in the environment, and they're going to get started working on that after this week. So any thoughts, comments, concerns, anything look wildly out of place here, or something you think maybe we should have?
Well, you've compiled a lot of different buildings into a singular site, which I don't think is a bad thing here, because you covered as many potential scenarios as you can. A little bit more realistic a lot of times is just the fact that you've got a crane working on a singular structure that's eventually going to top climb, and it's on the outer edge of the building and maybe reaching across the building. But I think with the use of the multiple buildings here, you can achieve, testing skill sets just as easily as if you were to make it a singular building.
Yeah, and the idea behind this environment was to create something where we could have, 20 or 30 scenarios that were all new, while reducing the amount of effort and impact on the developer side to having to create too many different locations, but we still have a good variety of, and we can initiate like blind picks and a lot of those different types of scenarios that we wouldn't otherwise be able to do. So.
Yeah, one thing I would add too, Chris, it was funny when we did the overhead crane environment. We included manufacturing type processes and equipment, aerospace, and steel mill all in the same building, which would never happen.
Yeah.
So you're pouring a ladle on one end for a steel mill, and you're lifting off, components for a wind turbine on the other end. So it's definitely intended to be a multi-purpose training environment. What is good too is that obviously on any level we could eliminate 4 of the 5 buildings and just have the one building remain. But I totally appreciate your point, and we can. The 3D models are actually really easy to come by. The scenario designs are a little bit more time intensive. So great overview, Ken. This is looking really good.
And speaking of scenario design, I think that's a great place to jump off and take a look at some of what we've got planned here. Specifically, the one we want to show off is the Christmas tree load. It's something that I've been told is very common in construction, is to rig up 4 or 5 steel beams and lay them across one at a time, girders that already exist, and just kind of bolt those in there. And so what we've planned to do here is, let's get that popped out over here. The plan is to take one of these existing hatchways, I believe one of these or one of these over here, that's about 20 feet wide, and lay those beams one at a time in there, and cover it up and act as though that's that would be a common task in steel structure erection. So and so the exact plan here is that the beams are lifted off of this pile there, and they're rigged up and ready to go as is, and they're more or less ported over here, to panel H, or to hatch H3-2, and laid across one at a time, as we have 2 signal persons or 2 construction workers essentially moving with the load and snapping those beams in place. And some of it's abstracted a little bit, but that's the general idea. Is what we do is to try and emulate that Christmas tree load laydown as accurately as possible.
So what you would do is you would take those beams and use them basically to complete the H3-2 opening and place
exactly.
them. Okay.
Yep.
That makes sense. I thought you were going down inside the opening. That would be not realistic.
That's not the plan. We do have loads that we're planning on dropping into these hatchways, and we'll go down. And we have a couple questions about that regarding like what kind of signal person layout we'd need inside the buildings to get that done. But we did have a couple questions about. Well, we can wait on those. We did also have a pancake flip scenario, and that's something that it's right here. And this is sort of a holdover from our overhead crane environment. We're trying to reuse these loads as much as possible, and it prevents an interesting challenge to the operator, especially up at 200 feet, to get this thing flipped over. But the idea is that it's more or less staged already in the area, and you lift very gradually. You trolley out and you hoist up gradually to get it up to the top point, to lift it vertically, and then to lay it down again horizontally. And the plan is that I don't know if you've have you seen that much in tower crane or otherwise?
They do it a lot with precast. What they'll do is like there's a lot of precast tripping where they'll have to take the precast, trip it to a vertical position. Usually they don't have to lay it back down again. It's a cladding that they're going to apply to the outside of the structure or something like that is usually where you're going to see that happen. So you wouldn't have to necessarily trip it up, stand it, and then lay it back down again. It would be much more common to hang it off the side of the building in a vertical position.
Good to know. That's something that we'll take into consideration when we're talking about this scenario, is if maybe we just stand it up and then get it directed over to the side of a building where we've got a hole or something. All right, excellent. And then I think we talked a little bit, or part of the agenda was that we would one of the new elements that we're introducing here is our control evaluation. So the idea is that before we do a scenario, or before we do a certain set of scenarios, we have this, the operator gets into the crane and they evaluate their controls. They hoist up, they hoist down, they trolley in and out. They swing left and right, and they throttle up and down, and they just evaluate and make sure that all these controls are working correctly. And so we're gonna make that a pre-scenario, like checklist sort of thing, like we do with some of our other training events and pre-operation inspections and all that.
Do you have that process? So is it all there in that paragraph? Or okay.
Yeah, yep. So the operator is presented with a checklist of functions and limits on a jumbotron or a holographic panel, not unlike what we use for the load chart checklist. And
yep. Chris, I'm not sure if you can read that, buddy, but
yeah, I can. So
a little bit.
Do you guys incorporate? And I don't know, maybe this is difficult to do. I mean, what about other like visual inspection checks on the crane of, bolted connections, gearbox, wire rope spooling on the drum? I mean, is there capability of that or not really functionality?
Yeah, as of right now, we don't do that. We don't like go up to the crane and inspect it, but we have that pre-operation checklist where we say, okay, name the 5 things that you'll want to look out for when you're inspecting like wire rope reeving, and you don't want rats, nests, or you don't want corrosion on the cables, you don't want splitting.
Yeah. If you can pull that up, you might, I don't know if you can pull up the simulator now and show them. If it's not fast enough, that's fine. But Chris, we have handled, it's certainly easy to do in VR. We haven't proved out that it's required yet for most of our subscribers, because the knowledge, it's very much like knowledge training that can be taught with visuals, a lot of pictures often, which is what we do in a classroom. So we haven't really, the utility of the VR headset is what we're trying to maximize, because that's the expensive part, right? To kind of,
wouldn't it?
Oh, no worries.
Yep.
So yeah, it's a good, we're doing a study with a certification body, and we're going to rope in the pre-op inspection task. And we are going to do that in the same methodology that they assess people in the actual exam with a verbal, well, not verbal, but a multiple choice type checklist as opposed to a in-person. But I think we'll get there eventually.
Yeah, but those are all the basic tests, your basic limit tests, up, down, in, out, pre-limits, final limits.
Yeah.
Those are the most.
Sure. I was going to ask you too, is that always pre-shift, or every time
limit check should always be a pre-shift inspection for any operator.
Yep. Great. Any other nuances around that? We understand the functions, but well, just so you know, it's sort of, we call it a training event. So it's a cool thing. If we have 100 tower crane scenarios, we can actually toggle on the what are we calling this event? It's not an inspection, it's the controller check, or
yeah, we'd call it, I don't think we'd call it a training event, because I actually talked to this a little bit about it with Andrew the other day.
ITI VR Mobile Crane Simulator.
Oh, you mute that.
Yep.
So it's not, I'm sorry, not a training event, but it's something we can toggle on for
essentially,
for every scenario.
Okay.
And it would be, it wouldn't be very fun if you had to go through 20 scenarios for your annual qualification exam in simulator and do 20 checks. Would you expect it just to be the first one? Like, would you, the function test, would you just expect to have to do that one time in a 20 scenario exam?
Yeah, after you've done it, unless the operator changed out, there's not really another reason to do it.
Yep. Dumb question. I know. We want to verify several nuanced things that were. One thing we definitely lack, I would say, as a company, and that's why we partner with Morrow, is on tower cranes. Like we don't have a ton of tower crane actually. We got 15 trainers, mostly related to mobile.
So yeah, to give you an idea of how we handle that in the sim, like we have a load chart here, and you can quickly select, some of the components, that the rigging and the headache ball and all that. And so what we do is we basically just have users fill out this checklist and
yeah, there you go. You just freeze frame it. There you go.
Yep. So we have users fill out this checklist and select, their capacities from this chart here. And you can see, because it's working at load radius is 60 feet, 82-foot boom length, you can select that from here. 60, 82, it would be 15,300. We've done this a couple times.
Yep.
And I'll show you more specifically the pre-op inspection.
Yeah, great.
The quizzes that we do.
So Chris, that's just called a pre-lift checklist. And it was hard to see because in VR, obviously the user is just looking peacefully to the left and to the right. It's not very fun to see on a laptop. Yeah, that's obviously, we can toggle that feature on for every scenario. And then we do typically just do this. We could actually toggle on this pre-op inspection for every scenario, but like the function test, we just do it usually once per training assignment, if you will, So This is the current method for the inspection.
Okay.
So yeah, if you turn on the volume here, the signal person's probably just explaining.
You might encounter. I structured the pre-op inspection as a quiz. Click Start to begin.
So yeah, you have.
So what is the first step to prepare your crane for a lift?
So in that case, it would probably be you do check ground conditions.
By the way, guys, Ken is Ken is not a 20-year experienced operator, 30-year operator like Chris. So
yeah, so I might.
That explains the point. I think Chris. Yeah, the idea is just to make sure Chris. What's cool about the function test, though, we're making it an actual scenario. So we're in cab, and we're controlling the functions, right? Ken?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Rather than saying what you do, making them do it is going to reinforce that skill set in the field.
Yep, you bet.
So
I guess we just brought this up to clarify how we're doing inspections,
yeah, we got all three crane setup checklist questions instead of quiz questions.
Yep, no problem. You can.
Okay, sure.
Nice. That's helpful, Chris. Go ahead, Ken.
Oh, turn.
No, I'll turn it back to you if you got more scenarios.
Oh, yeah, sure. So we did have, we actually asked a couple questions because we had Mike Parnell, our senior SME, design some of these scenarios, but he wasn't quite sure about the nuances of tower crane. And so we had a couple questions about specifically, we had a, I thought I downloaded that one. It's all right. We had a Connex box, a 1E. We had some questions specifically about the load path, particularly would it be okay to fly that Connex box over a building that's under construction if there are no personnel on the roof or in the building at the time of the flight? And we got a couple answers, and we'd like to know your opinion. Would it be okay? Would this load path be okay? Like, would it be okay to fly it over the electric substation, this hatch, and building B3 itself, as long as it were sufficiently high to clear all these hazards?
I don't see a lot of issue with it. I mean, the only thing on the electric substation is just making sure that obviously if it's electrified and what the voltage is and what the proper clearance is on it.
Right.
That's going to be the biggest one right there. But yeah, it's not uncommon to fly, especially with a tower crane over the side, and in even some cases occupied structures. I mean, some of the construction methodologies they use nowadays with tower cranes is, they'll build a building 2/3 of the way done, occupy it, and then come back several years later and add on the last 10, 15 stories of the building. So you really have no choice. You have occupied structure underneath of you.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. We kind of got that feeling that it would be okay. And we've specifically said in this scenario that the electric substation is de-energized. So there's no risk of, arc flash or anything like that.
Okay.
But yeah.
I don't see anything wrong with that path. It's just the nature of the beast with the type of crane you're using. It's not like can move the crane somewhere else to change your load paths.
All right, excellent. So we had another one, a couple more actually, specifically with a tower crane mast section load that we'd said we couldn't really fly over buildings because, you know, there were people moving around on buildings. It was deemed too hazardous, so that we'd should have pictures there, but here we go. So this is the load path we chose here specifically because we'd say, oh, you know, building B3 has too many, you know, construction workers moving around on it. It's too big of a hazard to move it over them while they're under construction. So we'd have another signal person move the load around B3, kind of in a blind pick position from T1 or T2, and then move it to staging area 3. And does this seem like would it be okay to fly a load around a series of buildings in order to avoid carrying that load over people, or would it be more standard to carry the load over the building in that case?
You know, both scenarios work. I mean, for an example, just to give you an example, see where your A2 is north of the tower crane there, and we've had this scenario come up before where, let's say the truck were out on Main Street there, and the guy wanted to pick up the load, but you didn't want it to fly over B4, B1, or B2. Well, he'd come up, he'd have to trolley in all the way to where he was inside the B4 building before he could make that swing to the right to trolley back out and set it at your S3 pad there.
Right.
So we actually have scenarios where, because of prohibitions like that, hospitals will do this to us sometimes. The cranes like the 550 you're talking about has one of the capabilities it has is a work zone restriction system in it.
Right.
It would actually create a blocked out area over that B4 where it wouldn't even let the crane swing over top of it. So you either have to come inside of it or go outside around that building. So that definitely happens.
And you can program that in the LMI, not in the sim, but in real life, you can program that into the LMI where it's like, okay, as you approach this blocked out area, you actually slow down and you're not allowed to swing left or right or trolley in or out to get the crane hook over that area.
That's correct, yes.
All right, good to know. Thank you. And then our last major question here was this steel pipe. Nothing particularly about the load path itself. We're swinging over these buildings, but when it's lowered into this hatch here, this is a 3-story building. The idea is that the signal person on top, if it's lowered all the way to the ground, won't be able to judge the depth all the way down. So if there is one on the roof of building 5 here, is it necessary to have another signal person inside at the first floor, the ground floor, or a basement level to radio it into the final landing phase, or is that signal person on the roof good enough? Can he say, okay, lower it to the ground, I can see you're about 5 feet out?
Well, most of the time with tower crane operations, it's almost always verbal communication. I mean, you talk to any guys that are preparing for operator certification or any guys that have experience with tower cranes, it's just that hand signals are very infrequently used. So especially when you're looking at that distance there, that's a pretty good distance. I mean, you're talking probably close to a couple hundred feet to get that thing out to your, I assume the blue on the left side is the starting area and where your mouse cursor's at is the finishing area. Is that correct?
Yep. It goes from staging area 2 over building B2, so it'll be hoisted up about 70 or 80 feet in the air to clear that building, and then to fly over building B4, and then finally arrive at hatch H5-1.
Okay.
And the question there was like, do we need another person inside the hatch saying, okay, I'm gonna pass off from the person on the roof to the guy on the ground to get it lowered to the building safely? Or can we just say, can we abstract that out? Can we say the guy on building B5 has really good eyesight and he can direct the load all the way to the ground? And in real life, would that be something that happens, or do you need another person inside the building to?
I think there'd be a definite pass off here. You might have one guy, because if you had the guy down inside H1, he'd have a problem getting the tower crane lined up in the first place.
Right.
And, you know, the other thing is always going to be that perspective as to landing the load. I mean, you're talking 3-story buildings, so you're talking 20 feet down inside that hole. You're definitely going to need somebody there to land it, so it, you know, you don't just slam the thing into the ground.
All right, good to know. And I think the idea was in the scenario that we have a third person in there.
Yeah. And you know, it's not uncommon for on a tower crane job site to have multiple signal people. So, you know, let's say you're working a really high structure, 20 stories high, they're rigging loads down on the ground where your trucks are at and stuff like that out on the access road. Well, is the expectation that the signalman's going to start him off there at the truck and then run over to that building, get up 20 stories on the building, and then signal that guy in to land the load on the roof of the building? Probably not. So you're going to have one guy starting over at the trucks. You're going to have another guy finishing over at the landing zone.
Okay. All right. Good to know. All right. Well, that's all I have as far as scenario questions goes and showing that off a little bit. At this time, I think we'd like to start taking questions from any members in the audience. Were there any other questions? Okay. No. Did you have any other questions? Anything you think might make a good list? Any comments, Chris?
Not right now. I mean, you know, I mean, I think you guys have a really good start there and stuff. You've got a lot of challenges presented in the one setup with all that. Were you guys going to look at remote control operation at all, or just strictly cab operation?
So we did have a person ask about, because we've got a belly box in development, and we did have a guy ask about if we could incorporate that into some of our existing over in Europe. 95% of crane operation is done remotely, so, or at least that's what he told me. So we talked a little bit about that. Zack, what are your thoughts, Chris?
Well, I mean, on the hammerhead cranes, we do it infrequently, but it is a possibility. I guess what it would really come down to is developmentally, what do you guys want to look at in the future? Do you want to look at potentially a self-erect tower crane alongside a hammerhead tower crane? Obviously, with the self-erect tower crane, yeah, you're primarily going to be running that off of a remote control box. That being said, you can, you know, achieve a similar feel between the two cranes, regardless of whether it's a self-erect or a hammerhead crane running off a wireless remote control. It's going to be much the same experience.
Yeah, it's interesting. So for our overhead crane simulation, every scenario can be run on a cab operated perspective as well as on the ground through a belly box control. I'm sure we could do the same thing, obviously, for hammerhead. So we'll definitely take that into consideration for development. And the one thing I wanted to point out too is that, well, let's make sure we understand too the hardware requirements for that. But the other thing, Chris, to understand, this goes back to scenarios, is that that environment we're showing is mainly for the lift scenarios, what we call lift scenarios, which entail typically a signalman or a bellman and loads flying. We do have about, 40 to 70 practice scenarios as well that are basically self-study. They don't entail a lift and a bellman. It's a lot of practice time, you know. But let's go back to the belly box. We're currently using a 4-paddle belly box. I know the one picture here is a 2-paddle, but you can fit 4 paddles on that box there. Who are the major manufacturers, or what manufacturers do you all use for those controllers?
Generally, it's HPC Radiomatic is what all our cranes come equipped with when we buy them from Liebherr.
Okay.
And usually it's just 2 joysticks like that, bi-directional joysticks. One's going to have the hoist function, the other's going to have the trolley swing function. Some of them will have a travel function on it, but travel, when you look at setting up tower cranes on a real traveling base, it's fairly infrequent considering how many cranes we have out right now.
Yep. And then could you speak a little bit of the perspective? Obviously, tower cranes are very large. So if they are used for hammerhead tower cranes, which you said is infrequent, I mean, we understand that the operators got to be placed in decent perspectives, but can you speak to a little bit more about standards around where the operator should be?
Well, generally, most of the time they want that guy have freedom of literally walking the deck of the structure and stuff like that. So if you're dealing with, say, a singular structure, the guy's up on the roof deck or the top deck of the structure, he's moving to whatever location to where those loads are being placed.
Yeah. So would you say typically the set point, not the pick point then? I mean,
usually the set, where they're going to set the load down at, not where they're going to pick it from.
Yep.
It's not one of those where they're saying, here's the remote, stand right here, don't move. If they're going to do that, they may as well go ahead and cab operate.
Yep. Yeah, you bet. This might be another dumb question, but anytime do you have multiple people with belly box controls to pass control of the crane?
Not in my experience have we ever had that situation arise.
Yep. Okay. And then other funny question regarding operator perspectives. Let's briefly chat about hook cams as well as like remote operation. So what percentage of your cranes would you say in your fleet have hook cameras attached to them for operator aids?
Oh, maybe 10% at the most. I mean,
Yep.
There's certain markets where they're very popular. It's kind of a growth market thing. There's people that in the industry are really divided over the benefit of a hook cam versus it being a potential distraction. So
Yep.
the Hawaii market for us is one of those markets where hook cameras are very, very popular.
Sorry, what market did you say?
Hawaii.
Oh, really? That's interesting.
Yeah.
Just the Hawaiian style.
Well, one of the primary hook camera manufacturers used to be based there in Hawaii. So.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, I know who you're talking about.
Really strong local market down there. Yeah.
Yeah. Interesting. We've experienced similar feedback, from customers. I think we've had a couple of manufacturers. I mean, it sounds like they have good products. I've talked to a couple of manufacturers of them, and it seems like very impressive. They're using state-of-the-art, technology, cameras and Bluetooth and all that stuff. I guess we've had the request of it being put in the sim, which would be an interesting experience to see a resolution in VR right there as a second screen, like a picture-in-picture.
Yeah.
But the other question then is remote operations. I've heard this is coming from big manufacturers, and I'm not talking remote like on the ground, like remote like in another state.
Like drone style. Everybody talks about it. Nobody's really developed anything solidly yet. So.
Yep. Okay.
I think the components for it are there. When you look at what's available with cranes, from a remote control operation to hook cameras to work zoning, and anti-collision systems, if someone were to ever marry all of that stuff together, it's a definite possibility, but
Yep.
I don't know. It's another one of those things. You can build it, but will they come?
Yeah. When we get asked those sort of questions, because a lot of people expect virtual reality to play a piece in remote operations, and we do think it would be technology that would be used, but we are like everyone. Just if only 10% of the market has adopted, for instance, on-site visibility aids, how ready are we as an industry to go to remote operations? But that's good feedback. I had another thing that popped into my head, but Chris, I'm trying to remember, but Chris, do you have any other general feedback or ideas for us to consider?
Until I see it kind of running and see what you basically have going, it's kind of hard to make some of those judgments. So I think you got good bones started on it for your layout and your crane type and stuff like that. And I guess really, I mean, the next step would be to see what the feel of the simulation is like once you put that crane into motion in terms, what it feels like from the seat. Are you accurately replicating the amount of movement that occurs in the tower crane due to deflection from loading or twisting from swinging? So those are the kind of things that until you can actually try that out would be hard to make some recommendations on.
You bet. I appreciate that. And if I could touch on the development time frame here, we're really in our development team is actively finishing essentially overhead crane scenarios and all that. Now we're in the design phase, if you will, of the tower crane, but we'll be doing actual scenarios in July, August, September for a November, December launch. So we'll probably be doing a quality assurance, like a scenario review where people have actually sat in the sim come October, November, where we definitely would love to get your feedback on that call. You touched on one thing that's not currently in the sim, which we are expecting to have in future releases. And just so you know, too, we don't release a simulation and never touch it again. We're on a kind of a quarterly release schedule where we update scenarios and configurations and whatnot every quarter for various crane types depending on the need. But you mentioned crane collision avoidance, and that, for instance, the environment we currently have set up, a lot of tower crane environments, you see 2 or 3 tower cranes,
Yeah.
So that's one thing we're definitely excited about having, but it's not in there yet. And then we might be picking your brain a little bit more on, we've talked to companies like Trimble and Laird and others on crane collision avoidance systems too. So training operators how they interface with that sort of software would be interesting, because I imagine that sort of software involves overriding controls at times, right?
That's exactly what it does. It ties into the control system of the crane and basically creates for lack of a better term, it's a fluid limit system. And when I say fluid, meaning that the limits aren't always at a set point, because what's happening, obviously, if there's 2 cranes on a job site, where the other crane is at any given moment is going to totally change how the crane reacts. So that's all they're doing. The 2 cranes are monitoring working radiuses, jib orientation, and then just like any other limit system in the crane, if one crane starts to approach another crane, it's going to start to slow the hook down and eventually bring the hook to a stop. So let's say you're trolleying out. If the potential is that you were going to trolley out and strike the jib of another crane, as you got closer to it, it would slow that down. And that whole collision avoidance system gets tied right directly back into the operational control system of the crane so that it will take and enact those limits to prevent a collision from happening.
Yep. Fantastic. Okay. You're a wealth of knowledge, my friend. We really appreciate you joining us today.
No worries.
Okay. We'll be in touch very soon. We want to respect your time and get finished here at the 55-minute mark. And this is ITI signing off. And thank you, everyone, for joining us. And Chris, again, thank you very much. We got to send you guys a care package or something as we get into the nice Northwest summer here for your guys' help with everything. We really appreciate it.
Excellent. So, all right. Okay. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Thank you, sir. See ya.
Take care.
Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.